Good afternoon, everyone. So glad you could join us this afternoon. Good to see everyone online this afternoon. We are excited to bring you our next webinar this afternoon, and we've got some exciting presenters. First of all, I want to tell you a little bit about how our process works. You will receive HRCI and SHRM credit, and you'll receive those by email. Once we have finished this afternoon, within the next week, you'll get those. So we are delighted about the HRCI business credit and the SHRM PDCs for you. You will be in listen-only mode, but you can chat. We do have a chat box at the bottom of your screen here. We want this to be participative, so please send us your questions, and at the end of the presentation, we will jump on those for you. This afternoon's presentation is called the Implicit Bias Audit, a roadmap to mitigate risk related to implicit bias. Our first speaker this afternoon is Dennis Kerner. Dennis is a PhD and principal and founder of the Assessment Standards Institute, a leading authority for the development and implementation of psychometric-based standards. Dennis is also president and CEO of ITN, a leading provider of statistical services for human resources departments, specializing in data-based methods designed to improve workforce and productivity. Our next speaker will be Gwen Tucker. Gwendolyn Tucker is a trusted advisor in matters related to diversity, inclusion, and equity. For more than 25 years, she has been actively involved in helping organizations develop and successfully implement diversity initiatives at the organizational, divisional, and functional levels. She created the Diversity at Work series to drive transformational change within people and organizations. And lastly, we have Cindy Ogden. Not least though, Cindy is president of Fuel It, an immersive training solutions firm in Memphis, Tennessee, where she is a leading talent development executive with more than 20 years of organizational and talent strategy and development experience, helping organizations from small businesses to Fortune 500 companies. So thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. You will get a copy of the PowerPoint, and there is also a recording of today's presentation if you would like to have that. So we will now turn it over to Dr. Kerner.
For being here today. We have our learning objectives on the slide, and you probably have seen these, but we'd like to refresh your memory. When you signed up for our session today, you saw these learning objectives, and one is about measuring the types and severity and location of implicit bias in your organization. Number two is to create and implement your strategic roadmap to mitigate those risks. And then also to monitor results and outcomes so that you can identify and capture opportunities for continuous improvement. Now, we're very sure that you signed up for this for a number of reasons. And what we'd like to do is to make sure that that we meet your objectives today. We do have a number of resources for you, but I'd like to ask if you would to respond to this poll in terms of what you hope to get out of this webinar today. And so if you would just select one and then submit it, we will see the results that will appear on the screen so we can get an idea of what you've come to this session for today. As Cynthia mentioned earlier, we have a number of resources that we will send out to you, and the session is being recorded so that you can get a copy of this the webinar via email once we're done. Excellent. So almost 60% of you said that you wanted to get all of the above out of this today. So we thank you very much for your participation and for your responding to our poll today. With that, our goal is to meet or exceed your expectations today. And we do believe that we have the roadmap to make that happen for you. In terms of where we head to next, as it relates to implicit bias, we will talk about measure, mitigate, and monitor. Dennis will come up and talk with us about measure. He has developed the implicit bias audit. He was going to take a deep dive on that. On mitigate, I will come back and talk about mitigating risk related to implicit bias. And then Cindy Ogden will come and share about monitoring. As Cynthia mentioned earlier, we will have time for Q&A to respond to your questions. As we go along, please submit your questions into the chat box. We will make sure to capture those as we go along. We also will have some, as I mentioned, we have some resources that we will send out. And will have about 15 minutes after the conclusion of our session in what we call the parking lot, in case we don't get to all of your questions. And for those who can hang around and still have questions after the close of our session, we'll be around for about 15 minutes in the parking lot to respond to your questions. Before we turn it over to Dennis, I have one more poll that I'd like for you to respond to. Many of us leaders believe that there are benefits of diversity, but we're not realizing that full potential. And so I'd like to get your thoughts on this in terms of what you would like more of or less of. As you respond to the poll that's on your screen, you have, if you would select one of these, that's your top priority. And we will see what happens in terms of our response. What would you like more of or less of as it relates to the items that are shown on the screen in terms of being able to realize the benefits of diversity? And you can see on your screen the results of our poll. 32% said different perspectives and groupthink, and less groupthink and more different perspectives. And 24% said reduced turnover, and also low engagement. So thank you so very much for those responses. We believe that your company's productivity and profitability is locked up in your people, inside your people. And we do believe that we have that key. With that, I am going to turn it over to Dennis, who will come and talk with us a little bit more about the implicit bias audit. Dennis, will you take it away for us?
I've got it, Gwen. Thank you. And to all of you, it's my pleasure to be here with you today. As we all know, there are many reasons for wanting a diverse, equitable, and inclusive organization. So in my part of the presentation today, we're going to look at using the implicit bias audit as a way to help us decide where to put our valuable efforts and resources. We will cover the problem or challenge of bias measurement, the implicit bias audit solution, and the implicit bias audit process. After we talk through the process, I'll show you some example of results from the IBA and outline how you can think about its application to your own organization. Let's start with the problem of implicit bias in organizations. As we know, most, if not all, organizations want to be diverse, equitable, and inclusive. That's the easy part. Now for the problem. Unfortunately, we all have limited time and limited budgets. So the question then becomes, what precise and cost-effective actions should we take to help diverse employees show up, be themselves, and be the most productive? Well, the answer to that question is simple. I suggest that you let data analytics be your guide. In simple terms, you can identify and correct problems by measuring what matters. And that's how we base our efforts. By capturing data related to implicit bias in your organization, you will gain important insights that can drive specific action plans that are designed to deliver against your precise goals. We all know that businesses are driven by very precise measurement and control of financial data. It is this precise control that is used to develop action plans and deliver results. Our challenge with implicit bias is exactly the same as those faced by businesses. By rigorously measuring bias data, we can show you how to uncover implicit bias problems that are negatively impacting your business. Once we find the problems, we can then take proactive plans to create the positive outcomes we all want. This is exactly what the IBA, or Implicit Bias Audit, does for you. The IBA is used to identify and measure the sources and severity of implicit bias in your organization. The Implicit Bias Audit uses a comprehensive data analytics approach designed to uncover implicit bias in ways that simple observations or surveys cannot. So how does the IBA achieve such results? Well, the process for getting IBA insights is straightforward and easy to execute. Our questionnaire construct is related to individuals in the organization and their personal bias experience. In our study of your organization, we categorize IBA questions by categorical observations, including self, team, manager, and organization. Questions are then related to individual observations, such as self, have you personally experienced bias? Teams, have you observed bias in your team? Manager, have you observed biased behaviors by your manager? And organization, what level of bias do you observe in the organization? Of course, there's a series of questions around each of these categories that are aggregated. So in the questionnaire, there are about 40 questions in length. And then the IBA goes a step further to gather demographic data such as race, age, gender, disability, and so on, along with your specific organization structure, such as job titles, locations, region, shifts, work lines, and so on, so that we can develop a comprehensive relationship to dig into the data and find where the bias exists. You might ask yourself, well, how is the IBA different from surveys that I can conduct myself? Well, the IBA is very different from off-the-shelf surveys. As you can see in the chart, off-the-shelf surveys, often free, which is a very good thing, but are generally limited to the use of descriptive statistics. And we'll go through the difference of the various analytics. Descriptive statistics are simply a story of what has happened. They basically provide a percent breakout of order of responses. The key lacking feature of a survey is that there's no diagnostic or predictive power. And that's where the ASI Implicit Bias Audit comes in. We provide diagnostic and predictive data that can pinpoint bias by organization location, job type, bias type, protected class, or the combination of any of those factors found in the question construct. The IBA identifies then the specific actions needed to correct the problem. And of course, it's customized to be locally validated to your organization and your specific needs. So when you conduct an IBA, you will get an extensive report that highlights the location of bias by one of 4 categorical groups as seen in this chart. Those categorical groups are job, team, manager, and organization. From this simple chart, you can easily surmise that there's a problem with bias as related to the manager level in the organization. But then you have to ask yourself, what bias is it? How severe is it? Where is it located? And at what position and by what demographics? This is where the ASI data analytics and AI programs can provide you with powerful insights. So this is how we do it. This chart shows you the level of analytics that can be used to generate data insights. Most all surveys generally provide descriptive statistics and stop there. That is, they tell you what's happened or how people feel. At ASI, We provide the full level of traditional survey descriptive statistics. You'll get a general survey report. But then we go to work to show you why it happened, what will happen next, and how you can fix it. The 4 levels of analytics provided in our reports are descriptive, diagnostic, predictive, and prescriptive. Now let's take a look at some of the examples related to each of those. Let's start first with the simplest of all of these, descriptive analytics. Descriptive analytics tell us what has happened. As we can see in the graph above, the percent plot of employees' response to the question. This is generally the level of analysis provided in most surveys. Here you can see how there are many unanswered questions from simple diagnostic data. It doesn't tell you where's the bias coming from, what are the demographics of the employees being treated in an unfair manner, who's treating the employees in an unfair manner. So in the next couple of slides, we're going to take you to the next level and show you how to answer these questions. In this slide, we see the next level of analysis is diagnostic analytics. Diagnostic analytics uses a series of data filters to find multivariable insights. That is, we look at combinations of factors to tell us specifically where and how implicit bias behaviors are occurring. So far in this example, if you look across the top, you can see job types and associate, clerk, sales, and service, and you can see those sorted by location, in this case, Atlanta, Chicago, and Dallas. So we see a strong indication of implicit bias in the sales group in Chicago, highlighted in red. Another example could be found in this chart, looking at the same data with different filters. Across the top, we have our 4 categories, the individual, the team, the manager, and the organization. And this chart shows us perception of bias by African Americans coming at the manager level. So from these 2 examples, using conventional descriptive and diagnostic tools, we find that pivoting and filter the data is a great way to observe factor interactions. But sometimes the interactions of categorical variables related to bias are not observable by filtering data or by intuition. This is where our AI and predictive algorithms make a big difference. We're now going to take a look at one simple implicit bias audit component analysis. In this example, we want to examine if there's implicit bias at the manager level. If there is, we then want to know what factors or combination of factors are causing it. So to gain insight, we collected our data and ran it through an ensemble of learning manager programs. The results of the analysis are shown in red and shows a high likelihood of bias, and green shows little to no bias. As you can see in our description tree above, which is an easy way to visualize some machine learning output, the analysis predicts continued implicit bias perceptions for new hires and low tenure employees. And based on our previous results of this study, the bias is most likely to be true for African Americans. So here we had a number of factors related to managers, such as location, and we had the demographics of gender, age, tenure, and we sorted through that data, and from there we're able to make predictions or find where the bias is most likely to occur. So that was a very quick overview of how the implicit bias audit works and what it can do for you. In conclusion, the implicit bias audit is a very robust and powerful tool designed to measure implicit bias in your organization. The power of the IBA is that it's customized to your specific organization. You decide the bias types, the demographics, the organization structure that you want to measure. Once this is in place, we will conduct the audit and provide you with the detailed report. The report can then be used to determine how you will develop and manage your corrective action plans. I know this is a lot, so we have put together an ebook that when you complete the course and take the final survey, there will be a link and you can download all of this in an ebook. So the next step, once we know where the bias is, its severity level, then we can implement corrective action plans. And this is where Gwen will help us. Gwen, I'll turn it over to you.
Dennis, thank you so very much. I really appreciate that. I must say that in my involvement in diversity initiatives for over 30 years, really, in corporate America, and implementing diversity and inclusion efforts at the organizational, the functional, and really all levels throughout the organization. It's really amazing. I really believe that this will provide companies with a competitive advantage, and I do believe that it is absolutely a game changer. I've seen metrics for representation, for engagement, and for other aspects related to culture, but I've not seen an efficient and effective way to measure and locate implicit bias. And quite frankly, I do believe that Dennis has found the key. And so the question is, now that you have measured and you have this data, this implicit bias, the question is, what is the next step? And the next step is really understanding what the data says and what it means so that you can assess the level of risk for your organization. I'm an accountant and a CPA by education and experience. And for about 13 or so years, I spent quite a bit of time in internal audit. And during my days, we always started with a general risk analysis. And that helped guide our actions during a particular audit. And so it was a significant step in identifying and managing risk. And so we do have a resource for you all. It's a risk-based thinking article on risk-based thinking as a takeaway. But for now, what we'll do is just kind of take a look at what we mean by assessing risk. I really, really like this definition. I'll give you a second just to take a look at it on the screen. It says, in the end, risk management is all about how organizational insights and knowledge are turned into strategic insights and advantage. And so through the implicit bias audit that Dennis just talked about, you were able to gain some organizational insights and knowledge. And now the question is, how do we take that information and turn it into strategic insights and advantage so that we're able to mitigate risk related to this data that we just found out? And when I speak of risk, I'm speaking of those things that threaten your organization's ability to achieve its strategic goals and objectives, and which are aligned with your vision, mission, and your core values. And so the question is, how do you manage those risks? One of the things that we talk about with assessing and managing risk after you get this information is we do something, we use a SWOT analysis to help guide our thinking. So let's just take a look at the SWOT analysis here on the screen. I'm sure that you're very familiar with it. SWOT stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Strengths are those things that are good now. Weaknesses are those things that are bad now and not so good. Opportunities are those things that lead you and show the promise of a good future, whereas threats actually highlights the potential for a bad future. And so the question now is, taking the organizational insights and knowledge that we gain from the IBA, the implicit bias audit, and turning those into strategic insights, is by taking a look at where are areas of strength. On the report, Dennis shared with you some areas that are in green that identify areas of strengths, but also those weaknesses, those things that pose a risk to you those things that are bad now and that can threaten a good future. Those things were identified in red. And so once you capture that, the way to mitigate risk is to determine, so now how do we leverage our strengths and seize on those opportunities, but then to minimize weaknesses and blunt the damage of that which threatens us. Understanding what the data means and specifically what it means for you is very important to help you determine how you will mitigate risk that are related to implicit bias within your organization. And so with these insights that you have in hand, consideration must be given to how they impact your HR and people strategy that will drive your company's strategic plan. And so with that, in terms of looking at your strategy, there are key areas of your strategy, and strategic plans are usually renewed every 3 to 5 years, and they are reviewed typically every year. And since we are at the beginning of the calendar year, which coincides with many of your fiscal years as well, you're in the process of looking at how to adjust your plan in order to achieve your goals and objectives. And so taking the information from your implicit bias audit, understanding what are those areas, I'd like to ask you all, for those of you, if you will respond to the poll on the screen in terms of how many of you, if you have an objective related to diversity and inclusion, yes or no? And then also, if you do, then how are those results measured? How do you measure your results related to diversity and inclusion for your organization? So 60% of you said yes, that you have an objective in your strategic plan related to diversity and inclusion. And also, if you can see the response to the second question, well, how will that be measured? 10% representation goals, 35% says all of the above, okay? All right, thank you very much for your responding to that. Once you get this data, the question is, what are the implications to your strategic plan? What actions will you take in terms of how will you prioritize your actions and adjust your HR strategy as needed based on the data that you received from the implicit bias audit and the insights that were revealed during that. And then of course now the implementation, because it's not enough just to make the changes on paper. How do you translate that into action in terms of making course corrections to drive change? Once that is completed, now you can turn your focus to the next area, which is monitor. And so Cindy, will you take it away from there, please?
Yes, thanks, Gwen. All right. Great insights on how to use a SWOT analysis for defining and mitigating risks due to implicit bias. Now, let's talk about how to keep your organization's core values in focus and target what you want your organization to be in terms of culture by maintaining integrity with those values and looking for continuous improvement opportunities. So you have the audit results in hand, you know exactly where the problems are or opportunities lie. So the question is what to do next. The whole point of this journey is to take action. So let's start by mapping out how to address the findings. Begin by creating a detailed education and awareness roadmap that includes metrics and encompasses tactics that address change management. And most importantly, align with your leadership to ensure you have support from the top. So let's take a look at how to put this all together. Every organization is different, and depending on the audit findings, you will need to create a strategic roadmap for the problem areas. For example, in the reports that Dennis showed us earlier, we see that sales reps in Chicago indicated an issue with management based on racial bias. So your target focus should be on addressing issues that appear to be present in Chicago between the sales team and management. What I've found that works well is to build a foundation of awareness and honest communication through a workshop series that we created to address diversity at work and erasing isms. However, this does not work if it's implemented as a one and done event. If you want to achieve real change, the strategy must include continued focus and evaluation. So I would follow up the workshops with supplemental online learning or independent assignments. I also recommend having plans in place for how to incorporate in your new hire orientation, along with leadership training, to ensure there's a constant and consistent message. The critical piece here is bringing awareness to the forefront and ingraining it in your organization. I've also found that including a deliberately scheduled plan of soft skills training to complement, like customer service and communications and even leadership training, will reinforce what employees are learning in the diversity workshops by focusing on empathy skills, understanding, and respect. And for the final aspect of the plan, I'm a big believer in metrics and recommend that you incorporate learning assessments and conduct another implicit bias audit after the training to see where awareness, attitudes, and behaviors have changed. And how you choose to implement the plan depends on your organization's size, budget, and goals, and of course, depending on the severity of what's discovered in the audit. For example, with the sales team and managers in Chicago, I would recommend starting with tackling that location first and then implement in the other locations. If your company is a small business, say with 100 employees or less, then you could implement it in phases by groups, such as focusing on managers first and then individual contributors, or by department or everybody all together. It really depends on your organization and the results of the audit. Next, make sure to incorporate change management in your strategy for addressing bias. The strategy that you implement will lead to awareness and changes in attitudes and behaviors, and change is not always easy. I've worked with organizations before that did a really poor job communicating results after surveys, leaving most employees apprehensive about providing feedback in future because nothing was going to change. This is where the ball gets dropped a lot because handling change management was not considered as part of the strategy. Here, it can be beneficial to partner with a vendor to recommend and develop a change management program, especially when you already have a full plate. An outsider won't take internal norms for granted and can help with crafting the message for all employee meetings and individual meetings. And they can help define who should be communicating what. We've also helped with building general awareness paralleled with the training implementation through things such as targeted animated messaging and posters and monthly notes on company intranet. Regardless of how you're handling change management, don't forget to keep your leadership team updated on the program efforts and the impacts. Speaking of leadership, lack of alignment with leadership is one of the biggest failure points I've seen when trying to implement a program strategy. When there's a lack of alignment, it's often because the leadership team has their clear vision and goals, and they don't understand how your program strategy fits in with theirs. If you're out of sync here, then I recommend taking a step back and considering alternatives. We worked with groups that had a clear strategy mapped out, but it didn't get traction until it involved us to help align with the leadership to drive for the results. The way that we work with the leadership team to get alignment is by presenting the summary of the audit findings and discussing programs and initiatives that have been implemented prior to the audit and where the audit has pointed out areas for opportunity. And we don't just focus on the negative, but make sure that we highlight positive results from the audit as well. We set business context and speak in terms of how the strategy supports business results through things like efficiency in spending or higher retention rates, which means more productivity. The key here is to speak their language and show how your program strategy will help them achieve theirs. And then finally, we gain approval and support for the plan and make sure that it includes monthly updates so we stay aligned with the leadership. When it comes to continuous improvement opportunities, every part of the employee lifecycle has the risk of implicit bias being present. Consider taking a deeper dive into your HR processes, such as recruiting, learning and development, performance appraisals, compensation, and succession planning to identify where bias might exist. There's a movie that came out several years ago that is a perfect representation of how bias exists in processes. The movie is Moneyball with Brad Pitt and Jonah Hill, about a Major League Baseball manager that changed the way they scouted for players. They used statistics to identify the players that had been labeled as flawed, and put their numbers together, and the numbers indicated that these players had real game-winning potential. A great quote from the movie that rings true: people are overlooked for a variety of biased reasons and perceived flaws: age, appearance, and personality. And as an example, one of the most undervalued players in the movie wasn't selected for the big leagues because he threw the ball funny, and he ended up being one of the most effective relief pitchers in all of baseball. The movie tells the story of having processes that people follow because that's the way we've always done it. Only to find out the process is inconsistent and full of bias that is preventing capable people who get labeled as flawed from joining the team. We have different audits and assessments that can be used to review these processes and help bring implicit bias to light. And the really great thing is that once you address these processes, you start to see the results of more consistent employee performance, and you start to see achieving the benefits of a diverse workforce that Gwen talked about in the beginning of the session. So we have covered a lot of ground here. For a quick recap, starting with the implicit bias audit, it measures the types, severity, and location of bias in your organization. Then, with that information, you create and implement your strategic roadmap to mitigate the risk related to the bias, and then monitor your results and outcomes to identify and capture opportunities for continuous improvement. It's as simple as that. So I hope this has been very insightful and given you some ideas on how you can implement these strategies in your organization. As Gwen mentioned earlier, we have a few resources to share with you. After the session, we will email out a link with the recording. And then, as Dennis mentioned, there will be an evaluation with a download for the ebook and an article on risk-based thinking. I've heard it said that without data, you just have an opinion. So the implicit audit gives you, the implicit bias audit, gives you insight to help you guide the next best steps regarding your diversity and inclusion strategy. If you are ready to get started, here's our contact information. There's a phone number. You can scan the QR code on the screen, or there's a poll question. So if you are interested, click yes, and that way we'll have your contact information to send you an email to set up something. And with that.
That was awesome. Thank you, Cindy.
Thank you. We
guys
will
are
open
really-
it for questions.
Yes, we have quite a few questions here, but you guys are really great at this, giving us all this information. And I am just personally amazed that we now have such a wonderful tool that we can measure implicit bias with. When I tell people about this, Dennis, they don't believe me. So I mean, because I've never seen it before, and a lot of people hadn't. So this is great information. So let's begin here with our questions. What's our first question is from Glenn Spadell. What size employee base is needed for this program? Who wants to take that one, Dennis?
I'll take that one, Satya. Thank you. I think it can work. The implicit bias audit is for really all size organizations. The amount of depth in which you can dive to get the analytics will be driven by the size of the organization. So if you have a small organization, the number of factors that you can use to segregate the data and analyze it will be smaller than a big organization. So a big organization is going to be able to look across a lot of different categories because they'll have the numbers to do it. But I think any size organization using the questionnaire is a good idea. And we would work with you just to show you exactly what categories, how many you should have, and what kind of data you can expect to come out of it.
Awesome.
Mhm.
Our second question is from Melanie Tindley. As part of the IBA analytics, was curious why gender, age, location, and tenure were used as categories. Why age and tenure would be separate categories?
Well, there in some, as everybody knows, in a lot of organizations, tenure and age are just two different attributes. So if in your organization, age and tenure were the same, then there wouldn't be a need for having two different categories to be looked at. That's why, but in many organizations, age and tenure are different. So that's why I put them in there. Those are illustrative examples. We would sit down with you and use your experience and your insights relative to your organization to develop the questionnaire construct and what interactions to look at.
So these would be tailored to each organization.
Correct.
Right.
Good, good. Next question, have you found this approach works across most type of entities, business, government, academia, not-for-profit, hospitality, entertainment, etc.?
You know, Cynthia, I've been doing this for many decades, and that's the beauty of data. The analytics are relatively the same. It's your expertise that gets put together for your organization. So the bottom line is it works for all types of organizations.
Good to know. Cindy Gordon asks, can any success be measured without upper leadership buy-in?
Cindy, you want to take that one?
Sure. Yes. Right. So if you don't have the leadership buy-in, you might uncover some bias in your organization through the audit, but if you're not going to take action, that puts you actually at more risk. And so having that leadership buy-in to take action and really make positive changes in your organization is what you need to achieve. And like I mentioned, there are strategies you can use to help get their buy-in by using the common language and making sure that your strategy is aligning with the company goals and the executive group's strategies.
I will say this also too, in the past, I've seen the most success with diversity and initiatives when a leader is a champion, an influential leader is a champion within the organization. Because we all know that different leaders have different levels and levers of power and influence within the organization. And so it could be possible that without some leadership is possible, but with not without a core contingent from the leadership group to drive change.
Thank you, Gwen. Our next question is for Dennis. Is the audit anonymous?
Yes, it is completely anonymous. No personal data is taken when people sign in to take the audit. It is they are told it's anonymous. And also, not only is it anonymous, but there's no individual data. So in running the analysis, we aggregate the data to look at the aggregated values and where they are. So everything is anonymous and there's no individual data.
Right.
I do want to chime in too, Cynthia, in working with initiatives such as this. Sometimes individuals are reluctant to be honest because they don't want to be identified.
Right.
And being able for it to be anonymous and quite frankly, for an external party to be handling it oftentimes gives it is a plus and lends credibility because it protects the individual's identification while getting their information and feedback.
Very good. Our next question is from Mary Jane Palmer. What if a decision has been made but not implemented and the decision process is now recognized to have been full of implicit biases, adversely affecting some? The team is expecting the decision to be implemented. How do you handle this? Should you backtrack and communicate the awareness of implicit biases? How do you communicate in a way that leads to growth and better engagement for the whole team, including those who would have benefited from the biased decision? That is an excellent question.
Cindy, I think that has your name all over it.
Oh goodness. Sorry. I closed my chat again. I need to read it. It was a very long question. There were several questions in there.
It is. All good ones.
Yes. Okay, what if a decision has been made but not implemented, and the decision process is now recognized to have been full of implicit bias, adversely affecting some? Okay, so the point is that it's about communication, right? Taking action to make things right. So like we talked about, creating your roadmap, your strategy for how you're going to approach it. If you have identified that bias does exist in that process, that decision, in that path, then create your plan for how are you going to attack it? How is it going to change your process? And again, the change management piece of it is the communication, having the conversation with the team about what you found and what changes need to take place to make it better.
Yeah, let me add to that, Cindy, too. And change management is always difficult, but data is your friend. Everybody wants to pursue truth. And so when you have data to back you up, it gives you the credibility in order to have people do what is right and be able to substantiate their actions for doing it.
I also would like to chime in as well. I think it's so important just knowing that implicit bias exists is not enough, but understanding how it prevents you from reaching your strategic goals and objectives is key, because that's what we're incentivized for, right? And so if there is a reward or an objective that's in jeopardy, and we can make that connection, I believe that that will be an incentive and motivation to make a move to improve the situation so you can get better outcomes. Cindy, any comments on that, or any additional comments, Cindy?
Yeah, no, you're right on with that.
All right, we have another question here. What risk does the organization have if the implicit bias audit reveals a problem? Is there risk?
Yeah, there can be. The true risk is if you do nothing, right? We all know from a legal perspective that having that knowledge and then not doing anything will definitely put you at risk. And again, the whole point of this is to change the environment, the culture, the organization to be better. And so why wouldn't you take action once you've identified where there is bias?
True. Okay, Gwen, for you, how much does this cost? If you want to have this done in your organization, is it very expensive?
One of the things that I mentioned earlier is that I do believe that Dennis has found a very efficient and effective way to measure implicit bias. And of course, the costs of that or investment will depend upon the number of people and their other factors, but it's a very cost-effective way to be able to get to and identify implicit bias, I believe. Yeah. Dennis, any comments from you?
No, I think the thing to do is just give us a call, and we're happy to sit down with you, show you some reports, help you find the amount of analysis that works for you, that's at your cost. But overall, it's a relatively inexpensive process.
So it's not based on the number of employees you have, Dennis?
No, it's really based on how much data you want to have analyzed. So how many factors do you want to put in? How many locations? How many demographic pieces do you want to add to the analysis?
Great.
So we're independent of the number of employees.
Good, that's great. Cindy, question for you. We have our own in-house training team. Can we do just the audit and then decide internally what actions to take from the results?
Absolutely, yes. The audit will present to you information about where and the severity of the bias in your organization and recommendations on how to approach it. And often we have worked with internal training teams to develop the materials around. We have a Diversity at Work series that we present in workshops and in e-learning that helps supplement what internal training teams are presenting as part of their full educational and awareness roadmap.
Gosh, you guys have answers to all these questions. I have another one for you. This one's for Dennis.
Okay.
How long does it take to conduct the audit, Dennis?
Well, it depends, Cynthia. And it doesn't take
The
very long.
universal answer.
Yeah.
That's the legal answer.
The audit is composed of a couple of steps. My part is pretty quick, 1 to 2 weeks. So the first part is we'll sit down with you and we will talk to you about how you want the audit constructed in terms of your organization. Do you want locations? Do you want which job types, which levels, and so on, and about which groups of which category of people that you want to look at. And then once we put that in place, someone will have to communicate to the organization that there's going to be a questionnaire and submit the questionnaire to everyone to complete. Once the questionnaire has been completed, then my analysis takes 1 to 2 weeks. After that, we'll generate a report and we'll sit down with you to review the report, and then it'll be your job to take those insights and turn them into plans and communication back out to the organization. So, generally 2 to 4 weeks.
2 to 4 weeks.
Mhm.
How do you recommend communicating the information back to the employees?
Cindy, you want to take
Yep,
that one?
I was about to jump in. Yes. Yes. So it does depend on your organization structure, number of locations, obviously, and what's found in the audit, right? But there are different ways that you communicate. Obviously, you're not going to, like the example that Dennis gave in the presentation that had showed implicit bias in Chicago, sales team, management. You're not going to point out, obviously, this is what we found. There's ways that you can present that to show what action we've done this for a reason, right? We're going to make a positive change in the organization. And here are some of the things we're doing to promote awareness and open communication. Would you like to add to that, Gwen?
Well, one thing that I will say, and you said this earlier, Cindy, is that when you do a survey such as this, the upfront work is very important, but also the follow-up work is very important as well. Because when you do an assessment or take a survey, and such as an audit, it's very important to understand, so this is why we did it, this is what we found, and this is what we're going to do about it. Mm-hmm. And this is what we found could be, boy, we're doing really great in this area. So that's good news. So high five, yay. And so I would just say it's very important that you close the loop and that you follow up and follow through whenever you do something of this nature.
Yep. So it's not going to always be bad news.
Absolutely.
You might get a great audit.
Well, it's going to tell you strengths and weaknesses, right? It's going to be both. Some places are going to be great, and there's that's the whole point. Some places can be great, some places can be okay, and some places are going to need attention. And the beauty of the audit is that it tells you where to spend your limited resources. So you're not spending resources against things that are great. You're spending against things that you want to influence and change.
How do you ensure that people are answering the questions honestly?
I think we try to make them as simple and as innocuous. Some of them are very straightforward. Tell us about you, tell us about your location. Most of the questions are written in a very simple, unimposing way.
That's good to know. Wow, well, this has been awesome, guys. I did want to point out to the folks who are on this afternoon, in case you haven't yet picked up your HR Professionals magazine from January, Gwen has an excellent article in here that I did want to point out, and you can go on our website if you don't have the magazine and read it, because this gives you a lot more information about the audit. It's called Measure Your Implicit Bias in Your Organization and Eliminate It Now. How wonderful to find out that there is a tool out there that people can use to engage their employees and to find out if they have implicit bias, measure it, and eliminate it. This is just fantastic. Oh, looks like we got another question pop up here. Oh, that's the post-session evaluation out there. Conducting an audit and showing affirmative actions to address problem issues. Would this help to respond to a possible EEOC charge from Dan Bates? Who wants to take that one?
Cindy, you want to take it?
Yeah, right. So yeah, first of all, disclaimer, I'm not an attorney, so don't take this as legal advice, okay? Second of all, yes, it is always going to be in your benefit to show that you're being proactive as an organization and that you are looking to assess where bias might exist and take care of it before you have any charges come up. So yeah, it could help you.
Well, here's another one from Ed Gibbons. We all know that change is hard and in some cases not easily accomplished. What can you offer to senior management and business owners how they will benefit from implementing this strategy?
Cynthia, read that again, please.
Yeah, we all know that change is hard and in some cases not easily accomplished. What can you offer to senior management and business owners how they will benefit from implementing this strategy?
One of the things I'll say, and from this, Cindy, if you want to follow on with me, as I mentioned earlier, it's very important to, once you identify the implicit bias and you overlay that with results, and you identify not only your opportunities, but your threats, how are you performing in terms of towards your goals and objectives, right? And if those are in jeopardy, that should be motivation to move and to take some action, right? I heard someone say once that when the pain of staying exceeds the pain of leaving, that's when you'll move. Right. And also too, in doing my research for diversity and inclusion, it says that embarking upon a diversity initiative either takes great vision or great pain, right? And so the question is, what will move your folks? Cindy, I don't know if you have any other comments on the change management piece. Any other comments there?
Right, yes. And it just lost, I just lost it. Sorry, I was looking at another thing. We'll move on to the next. There's several questions coming up, sorry.
Okay, we'll move to the next one then.
Well, this is a quick one. Are there SHRM PDCs for this session? There are. Yes, you will get one SHRM PDC plus one HRCI business credit for today's webinar. We appreciate your being on. I think we have time for one more question. This one is from Jennifer Garapi. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Will you please give us an example or two of questions asked on the questionnaire that will help to find bias?
Sure. Let me take you through a couple of sample questions. And remember, we have them related by demographic and by place in the organization. And then we have self, manager, team, and organization. So let me give you a couple of these. Self, have you ever experienced bias or discrimination in your organization? Team, employees treat each other in a fair and unbiased manner, agree or strongly disagree. Manager, my manager has been proactive in efforts to eliminate bias in our organization, or my manager is highly inclusive and unbiased in the management of our group, strongly agree, disagree. And then there's organization questions. How would you rate your organization? Not diverse and inclusive or very diverse and inclusive. So we use a Likert scale. Everyone in my organization is treated fairly regardless of race, gender, ethnicity, age, sexual orientation, or other background. So those are just sample questions across some of the different groups.
Excellent. Well, I believe we're out of time, guys. This is one of the best webinars we've had. It's full of information and it's going to be very helpful to a lot of people who have been looking for a way to measure bias in their organizations. So we will be sending out the PowerPoint, the recording, the ebook, right, Cindy?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Plus and you'll get your HRCI and your SHRM credit. Is there anything I'm forgetting?
There is a link for the post-session evaluation.
Oh, yes, please fill that out for us.
In the chat window.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, and we look forward to having you next Thursday when we will have our next webinar, and it will be on avoiding the retaliation trap. And it is also, it will also have one SHRM PDC and one HRCI business credit. So thank you all for being with us this afternoon. Be sure and email us if you have any other questions for Dennis or any of the group here. And we look forward to seeing you in next week's webinar.
And Cynthia, we will hang around for about 15 minutes for
Okay.
those who would like to hold on if they have a question.
Right.
Thank you.
Otherwise, thank you
Thank
so
you,
very much,
Cynthia.
everyone.
Thanks,
Thank you,
everyone.
Cynthia.
See you next week.